Well, today we want to continue the series, The Fruit of Walking with Jesus. It's a study out of Galatians 5, where the fruit of the Spirit, Paul writes about what it looks like to be someone who is following Jesus. These are characteristics that begin to become us. And what we've been saying in the series is that as you walk with Jesus, over time, the way that he walked becomes the way that we walk and live in this world. And it's a lifelong endeavor. God is with us as we grow and become more like Jesus. It's actually his agenda for us to become like Christ. And so in this study, we're looking at all the various characteristics of what that actually looks like. And today I want you to think with me about the significance of consistency. The significance of consistency. Actually, last week, probably my favorite child now actually said what she appreciated about me was that I was consistent. And I was like, wow, really? And I love you. You're my favorite, Have you thought about the significance of that? Are there people in your life that they're constant, they're just present, they're always there, and you can depend on them, right? It's a real blessing. Consistency in life is a real blessing. I even think of our church family. This year we're celebrating Norkenzie's 70th anniversary, right? 70 years. And you may or may not know this, but our church family has a reputation in certainly the church community and even in the larger community of just being kind of a present, consistent place where Jesus is exalted and taught and served. And in the various ways, it's refreshing. I often, I never tell people who I am for as long as I can, And they said only a handful of times in my life have I been like eavesdropping when people have been talking about our church family, but it's always been encouraging. And I think because of, for sure, the faithfulness and the consistency of God's people in this place and in this community for 70 years now, that we have this, sense of, in the community, just being a stalwart, kind of a bulwark of faith, a place where people can go to find hope and healing and help. And so that's great. Now, 70 years, the downside to that is you can get stale, you can get old, you can get crotchety, right? I'm not looking at any of you 70-year-olds, maybe some of you 80-year-olds. No, I'm just, But through the years, we've been able to just keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, and the consistency is a blessing to us, of course, but to the larger church family and to the community. I was even thinking about our preschool. If my math is right, this fall, Norkenzie Christian Preschool will begin its 50th school year. Are you kidding me? What does it take to have 50 years? We for sure have parents who were students in the preschool who have now, right here, who have brought their children back. Now, what I am waiting for, and maybe the Lord will let me live to see the day, I'm waiting for that grandparent their grandchild is coming and the grandparent was a student. 50 years of the preschool, we might get there pretty soon. That kind of consistency, right, is a real blessing. That kind of consistency through the years, faithfulness through the years is a blessing. And there's, of course, it results in, there's a waiting list, to enroll your preschooler at Norkenzie Christian Preschool. So how about it? How does consistency bless your life? It is a blessing, right? Now, the thing about consistency is that it can seem very boring. Consistency in your life, it can seem very, very boring because you're just consistent. And certainly the world offers many more exciting ways to live. Exciting ways to live. Elise and I did 12 years of foster care and serving in the community with these kids who really were orphans in our community. And part of the ministry of doing that was oftentimes getting to know the parents when there'd be visitation, that kind of thing. And I'm telling you, it's a broad stroke, but I think virtually every child that's in foster care, which, praise the Lord, it's down. When we were doing it, there was 1,200 kids in Lane County that were in foster care. It's down to about 700 now. And the church is making a real difference in this area. We've partnered together with, these other 50 churches, and it's like we're making a difference in the foster care system and also investing in the lives of these families. But all of the kids, whether it's 700, 1,100, however many, the reason that they're in foster care is because the parents had a more exciting way to live. And if you're a parent, you know what I'm saying. There are days where consistency as a parent, there's other things you would rather be doing than doing this again, right? And this child has needs again. And the days are long, but someone tell me, right? The years go fast. And so parents who aren't consistent, it's because there's something more exciting. And usually there's, addictions that have, grabbed the hearts of people, and it's challenging and different. And we help them grow because at their heart of hearts level, they want a relationship with their child. They don't want to be separate. They want to house their children. What they need is to create a safe and consistent place for their child to be with them. So what about consistency? Today, in the fruit of walking with Jesus, we're talking about faithfulness, right? Faithfulness. If you've had consistently present and positive relationships, parents, siblings, friends, my friends, that consistency from them towards you is faithfulness by them. Maybe your story is you had one parent who was faithful and consistent, and you had one parent who was off doing whatever. That's the story for a lot of people. And one parent had to take up the role of two and do twice, but they were consistent. If that's true, you should praise the Lord for your parent, for both of them, but especially today, thinking about the consistency of your parent to kind of take up the slack and give you a safe place to grow. And hopefully they knew Jesus and introduced you to him. Walking with Jesus, all right, will produce the kind of steadfastness of character that others will be able to trust. This is faithfulness. This is being a consistent person in the life of others. And it comes as we walk with. It's one of the characteristics of us. It's how we become like Jesus, where we become a faithful person. A faithful person. Now, faithfulness, consistency, it for sure can be taken for granted, and it usually is. Because faithfulness and consistency is so consistent, people will take you for granted because they just know you'll be there. They are trusting your character to be there. Now, when we turn to the Bible and look at what, faithfulness in the scripture, there's a sense of faithfulness being, it's a very strong, it's a sense of strength, right? It's a sense of foundation. It's a sense of support where faithfulness allows a foundation where life can really thrive and people can be healthy and whole because of the strength of that foundation to be faithful. God, of course, is this firm foundation and a support for his people. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 9, we see this. Moses was teaching the children of Israel, and he writes there, "Know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is the faithful God, keeping his covenant of love to 1,000 generations to those who love him and keep his commandments." So when we think about faithfulness and consistency, we rightfully think about God. Did the sun come up this morning? Did the earth spin off its axis? I mean, even creation proclaims the goodness and the faithfulness of our God. He is consistent. He is always there. He doesn't sleep or slumber. You and I are the created beings. We actually are required to sleep. God doesn't sleep. And if you wake up with concerns in the middle of the night, who is there consistent and ready to hear your prayers? Maybe you're having a dark night of the soul. You're crying on your carpet. Who is there to hear you? It's God. He is the faithful God. He is the strength, the support, this foundation. A negative example, actually, from Moses again, in Numbers chapter 11, Moses was, the children of Israel in the wilderness, they were a wreck and a mess. And Moses, in a moment of frustration, actually gives us the opposite sense of this faithfulness as being strength and support. Because when he asks God, it's this conversation, Moses saying to God, God, did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land you promised on oath to their ancestors? This word is the same idea, the imagery of carrying. Moses saying, I can't support them like that. I can't be their strength. I can't carry them. I can't do this. Like a nurse, as a nurse carries an infant. This is the meaning of the word, right? This idea of faithfulness and strength and stability. Here's some other words. Stability, consistency, trustworthiness. God is all these things. And Moses is saying, I can't be these things for your people. Did I give them birth? These are your people, God. Moses saying, you deal with it, which God, of course, does, because he is able to care for his people. And he is that foundation, that strength and support. Right? He is consistent, and he is trustworthy. This is who our God is. Speaking of trustworthy, it's a great word as we think about faithfulness, because trustworthy is steadfast of character that you can depend on. Even the word itself, right? Worthy of trust. In our life, trust is given to the one in whom we have confidence in. When you have confidence in somebody, you are able to trust them. They are trustworthy. We trust them because they are consistent. We trust them because they are reliable. We trust them because they are faithful. Right? This is faithfulness. To be unfaithful, when we talk about unfaithfulness, the person is unworthy of that trust. We have no confidence. We have little to no belief in their ability to do and to be who they say they are. And in the human experience, unfaithfulness, the breaking of trust, is one of the most painful of all human experiences. And it's likely that you've experienced this. You've experienced the pain of unfaithfulness of another person. You may have thought and you may have given them your trust, and then trust was broken. We live in a very broken world, don't we? Very broken world. And even those who have the greatest of intentions, we still can show up as unfaithful, not strong enough, not consistent. We see something else that's more exciting, and we run after those things, and we hurt people along the way. It happens. Not with God. Since God is faithful, since he's the one who is all-powerful, he has strength to do this, to support us, to give this foundation. He is eternally consistent and ultimately trustworthy. Since God is faithful, he is the one in whom we ought to place our trust. He is trustworthy. He is a faithful God. And when the experiences of life come and your heart is broken because you trusted someone who ultimately was untrustworthy, God is present and able to heal your heart and to help you along. He will not leave you. He will not forsake you. God is faithful. Jesus is faithful. He sees you. He knows you. He will not let you down. He is strong enough. While the rest of us are not strong, we're weak in our flesh and in our abilities, God is strong enough. Now, faithfulness as a character trait, since God is faithful, Jesus is faithful, as we walk with him, right, we become more like him in faithfulness. The word faithfulness even, you can't escape it. The idea of faith is right there, right? It's part of the word, faith. There is a a strong connection between faith and faithfulness, as you'd expect. And faith is an important part of the gospel. Paul would write, we are saved by grace through faith. Yeah, it's kind of a Sunday school answer. I just kind of led you right to it. Thanks to both of you who said it. Okay. So faith is very important to the Christian life. And there's a strong connection between faith and faithfulness. But faith, usually where faith is reduced to is just believing, like, oh yeah, I believe that. But when you connect it with faithfulness, faith is not a momentary belief that God is or that the good news is true, like, oh, I believe that. And then you go forward with your life. Now, belief is a vitally important part of faith. In fact, the Hebrew writer would say, without faith, Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith, it's impossible to please God because anyone who comes to God must believe that he exists and he rewards those who earnestly seek him. And so belief is an important part, but the relationship with God where he rewards those who earnestly seek him, this is faithfulness here, where God is faithful to reward those who are seeking him. The seeking him, the living for him is an expression of faithfulness that we believe. Faith is more than just agreeing with that idea. Faithfulness is a commitment to the truth, and believing in that truth, being committed to that truth is seen out in the way that we live. That's why James, people have struggled through the centuries with James, the little letter there, because in James chapter 2, verse 14, he actually asks the question. He says, what good is it, my brothers, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Great question. People struggle with the question because it's a whole nother sermon, but just briefly to say, we misunderstand deeds, and we think of what Paul wrote about when he said we're not saved by works in Romans. What Paul was talking about was the Old Testament law and doing the works of the old covenant, the old agreement with God. And he said we're not saved by that way any longer. We're saved by faith in Jesus. And then James comes along and says, what good is it to have faith, but you have no external outward living of that faith? It's like, what good is it to have faith without faithfulness, is what James is saying. Someone claims to have faith, but they have no deeds. There's no evidence that they actually believe this. If faith is a commitment to what you believe to the point where it changes your life, then we will absolutely have evidence. We'll have deeds in the flesh and in the body that we believe that the gospel is true, that Jesus is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We believe that, and it changes how we live. James goes on, verse 18. Someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by what I do. Right? So faithfulness is faith on display. When you're faithful, it's like you're living out what you believe. I think I was in middle school. Those middle school years, remember those years? I know you've tried to forget those years, but I was in middle school and I learned that my dad, now this was before I was born, okay, but my dad smoked cigarettes. And I was a middle schooler and the whole imagery of my dad all comes crashing. My dad did what? He smoked cigarettes. Apparently, as a middle schooler, smoking cigarettes was no, you don't smoke cigarettes. Well, the rest of the story is, at the end of high school and when he went into the Army, my dad smoked cigarettes with his Army buddies, that kind of thing. And I don't know what year it was, I think in the 50s, where the Surgeon General came out and said, hey, and now on cigarette packages, not that I've seen one, but on cigarette packages it says the Surgeon General has said what? This is bad for your health. And when my dad heard kind of the news, the Surgeon General has said smoking is harmful for you, that was the last cigarette he smoked. I think my Grammy Johnston had something to do with it too, but the Surgeon General said, so my dad, right? So you hear this news, from the Surgeon General. My dad heard it. He believed that it was true. And that was the last cigarette he had smoked. What if a year later he started smoking again? What would you say about his faith in what the Surgeon General had said? Once he realized it was bad, he probably had a sense of, this can't be good for you. But when they came out and said it, all done. So his faithfulness was seen in what? Not just believing that the Surgeon General knew what he was talking about, and that's what all the evidence pointed to. His faithfulness was demonstrated in he never smoked another cigarette for that reason. For the sake of his wife, his children, his family, never again. That was all before I was born. Do you see the parallel? When we say we believe that the gospel is true, we come to faith in Jesus, and by his grace, through faith, we are saved. Our commitment to that truth will result in faithfulness from us. So absolutely, there will be things that we do that are evidence to what we believe. Observable faith over time is called faithfulness. And walking with Jesus, over time, we will cultivate this faithfulness, this trustworthiness. People can depend on us. We will become consistent in the lives of other people. For James and for Paul, Abraham becomes the great example. You know, in James chapter 2, verse 20, the very next verse, James writes, "You foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did." So Abraham is known to us as the father of faith because he believed in God and his actions lined up with what he believed about God. James mentions Isaac, but even before that, way before that, God told Abraham, rise up and go, leave your father and his household, go to a land that I will show you. Where are we going? I will show you. He didn't know where he was going, and Abraham said, okay, and he left. And then later, God promised that he would become the father of many nations, and yet he had no children. And Abraham is the father of faith, and he was full of faithfulness, but he was not perfect. He and his wife, they tried some ways that God didn't know. And then finally, God delivered on the promised child, the son, Isaac. And when Isaac was, a teenager, God said, I want you to go and sacrifice Isaac on the mountain to me. And Abraham did it. He's like, willing, and the angel of the Lord didn't stop Abraham until the knife was being plunged. And it was clear that you would not even withhold your own son from me. That's how great Abraham's faith was. The Hebrew writer would say about that scenario that Abraham believed God. He believed that God could raise his son from the dead because the promise was founded in the faithfulness of God. And whatever God was asking him to do, he didn't understand it all, but he had faith to trust God. God is trustworthy, and he would follow and in that be faithful to God. And God, of course, delivered Abraham time and again. And he is the father of faith. As we walk with Jesus, faithfulness, not just believing, but actually living lives of faithfulness, of consistency, being trustworthy. This is what we become like. It becomes our characteristics. This is what we are like. So for your family, you become that consistent, trustworthy presence. For your parents, you become that faithful, trustworthy son or daughter. If you have siblings, they can depend on you. Right? If God's blessed you with a spouse and with children, you become a person who's not living for whatever excitement of the moment, but you are living a life of faithfulness to God, which then blesses them because you are following Jesus. And you are trustworthy. They can depend on you. They don't even think about it. They just depend on you. This is what life begins to look like as you follow Jesus. You become faithful. And listen, for your church family, you become for the rest of us a faithful, consistent, trustworthy person, loving Jesus, worshiping him, serving him, saying no to ungodliness and all the unrighteousness of the world, and saying yes to God, not perfectly, but full of faith, depending on God, who is the giver of strength and is full of all love and grace for us. Your faithfulness strengthens this church. If we're going to go for another 70 years, if there's going to be another generation, and if most all of us here right now are with Jesus, and if he doesn't come back before that time, and will there be another generation and grandparents, and will there be? If we're faithful, faithfulness is not flashy. There's other things we could be doing, but to be trustworthy and consistent in this stewardship we've been given, to love God with our whole heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to serve him with all that we have, all that we are, all that we have, to be faithful like this. This comes only as you walk with Jesus. For many of us here, you're not quite there yet for a variety of reasons. Oftentimes when people first come to Jesus or they first come to church, it's really all about, should I spend a couple hours here? What's in it for me, right? And that's okay. If you're new to Jesus or new to North Kenzie, it's fine. We've all been there. Is this a good use of my time? Should I be with these people? But as you are and as you walk with Jesus, something changes where it's not about what's in it for me. It becomes, this is the Lord's house. This is his family. I don't look to be served, but I'm looking to serve. These are the things that happen as we grow in faithfulness to God. And if you walk with Jesus, this is where he's taking you. Jesus, who did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, he emptied himself, became in the nature of a servant. He became obedient to his Father, even to the point of death on a cross. Was there anything good in it for him? Not the cross. The glory that was beyond the cross, he saw to that. But he was faithful, and we are saved because of his faithfulness, his consistency, his ability to be strong. And as we walk with him, these characteristics will grow and become more and more like us. So, as we conclude here, every human being wants these things. I'm convinced of that. There's no person in our community that would really strive for brokenness and dysfunction, but brokenness and dysfunction rule the day, don't they? Every human being wants these things, but brokenness abounds, and so marriages are horrible and often ending. Families are being devastated. Children are being raised without any kind of sense of anything. And what people want are faithful ones. Everybody wants this, but not everybody has that. Even in churches, unfaithfulness among the church can happen, and we can get selfish. Everybody wants to be faithful. How do we become faithful and trustworthy? Well, just to end with the words of Jesus, the greatest sermon ever preached and recorded for us by Matthew. Matthew 5, 6, and 7. We often call it the Sermon on the Mount. You should definitely read it in one setting. And Jesus teaches about the kingdom, and the ways of life of following him. And he gets to the end of the sermon, right? He just talked about entering through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate that leads to destruction. Many go that way. Many go the wide gate, but narrow is the gate that leads to life. He said that. He says, watch out for false prophets. They're like sheep's in wolf's clothing. He says these words, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, didn't we do all these things for you? And he replies to them, I never knew you. And then the sermon ends with these words. Jesus says, therefore, whoever hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as the teachers of the law. What was the conclusion for Jesus' sermon? You've heard these words of mine. Now, if you put them into practice, it's like building your house, your life on a solid rock foundation. And life happens. Storms of life come. But the faithfulness of our God and the strength of his word is a foundation that is trustworthy. And our life will endure. But if you don't practice them, if you just in one ear, out the other, if you get distracted by shinier things, then it's like building your house on sand, because the foundation that you're building your life on isn't strong enough. God is the only faithful one who is strong enough and able for us to build our lives upon. Are you building your life upon Jesus today? We're going to sing some songs, we're going to pray, and we're going to have communion today. All of this in response to God. This is the opportunity just to thank God for his faithfulness. Thank him for this foundation that you can build your life on. I hope that you have. If you have built your life on the foundation of Christ and it's strong, then you praise his name today. If you're living for other things and it's not working out, this is an opportunity to kind of come back to the words of Jesus and say to the Lord, I want to build my life on you. And as you do, you'll become more and more faithful. He's one that we can look to. He's one that we can talk with. We can build our lives on him. And just to say, it's not make-believe. Jesus is real. His Spirit is among us. His truth is truth. You can safely base your life on Christ. Does anyone say amen? Let's stand and let's sing our response to the Lord.